I was 11 years old. At the time, I was living in an apartment situated on a street with an ongoing construction. Needless to say, they often tapped into the electric supply and the power fluctuated quite a bit. Therefore, the streetlights often served no real purpose, especially in the winters when evening dawned on us with pitch black darkness. That is relevant, so keep it in mind. From what I remember, it was a weekend I was supposed to spend at my friend's house. For an 11-year-old me, this was an exciting prospect, having been loaded with schoolwork the entire week. I was to spend what I believed to be Friday night sleeping over and spend the entirety of Saturday at her bungalow, to return home that very evening. What made it even better was the fact that her parents had an event they could not avoid, and therefore trusted us to stay alone in their 2-floor house for the entirety of the 6 hours they were gone. Back then, the idea of spending a whole night alone with my friend was great. No interference and a whole 6 hours of games and movies on their huge TV. As it turns out, my friend had other ideas. I arrived at her house just short of 8 p.m. It was already pretty dark, and her parents had waited for me to arrive before telling us about emergency contacts, dinner, and such. They also reminded us to get their 4-year-old Labrador inside, as the weather was acting up and his kennel had a few loose panels, which leaked when it rained. This is also an important fact to be noted. After they left, we watched a few cartoons, had dinner, and were chilling in her living room playing cards. That's when my friend Sid had the ingenious idea of exploring a fenced plot of land a few hundred meters down the street that she resided on. There was no construction there, so what little of the area didn't have shambles was overgrown with plants and weeds. We got the dog inside, leashed it to its long chain that allowed it to roam within reason, got the keys, and left the house to make the short 10-minute trip. At this point, it was about 10 p.m. In retrospect, this is where we still had a chance to avoid this particular encounter, but being the curious and daring 11-year-olds that we were, we ventured anyways. Rather uneventfully, we arrived and set to climbing over the 2-meter wall. Luckily for us, the wall was broken enough in places to make good holds to carry us over. Once inside, Sid suggested that we sit a few meters away from each other for as long as we could, till one of us was too scared to do so. We faced each other and walked backwards till there was just enough light to see the general silhouette of the other. After what seemed to me like a good 10 minutes, I saw Sid's hunched form rise and start to walk towards me. She seemed to be walking rather fast and in a haphazard manner, jumping over rocks and such at a daring pace, even getting cut by some thorns in the process. She came up to me and, just as I was about to laugh and call her out on being scared, she told me to get up because she needed to go feed Shaggy. I remember being really confused because her parents had already filled his bowl with food, and he had this water thing which he could operate in case he was thirsty. But I saw her face, and let me just say, I have never, ever seen her this pale. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. So without asking questions, I said okay, and we made our way back over the wall, albeit in a tense manner and rather quickly. The moment my feet touched the ground, I felt Sid grab my arm and straight up just start sprinting down the street. To put things into perspective, I had a bruise from the way she grasped me for 2 weeks straight. So we ran like hell was chasing us, arrived at her house, and went in through her front yard fence gate, a towering metal gate without bars, and she told me to unlock the front door while she deadbolted the metal gate's various locks. At this point, I was starting to panic, but we got into the house, and Sid then proceeded to run around her house, locking and closing all possible windows and doors, as well as pulling the curtain shut. I was very confused as to why she was doing this, and so was her dog, who stood there and followed her around while she did so. After about 10 minutes, she came back into the ground floor living room, and with a very scared expression explained to me that the reason that she did that was because while we were sitting apart, she happened to glance away from me a few meters to my right and see another human silhouette crouching in the bushes. She thought she was imagining it until it moved closer to where I was sitting and seemed to be unaware that my friend was watching them. She didn't want to startle me or the person, and so she made up having to feed her dog as an excuse to get out of there without alerting the person still crouching there. After hearing this, I was quite shaken, and we hugged for a few minutes, deciding not to tell our parents as they had very much warned us not to go out of her compound. We didn't want this to be the last of our time alone together having fun, and so we peeked out the window into the street, which seemed to be empty as far as we could see, and proceeded to put it behind us as excitement took over our minds once again. I would have loved to say that that was the end of it, but what happens next is stuck with me to date, and I hold a fear of that situation from that point onward. To give you an idea of the layout of her compound, her house was surrounded on two sides by a lawn, and the lawn was then surrounded by a wall some 2.5 meters high. The wall had one entrance, which was the tall metal gate I talked about previously. The house itself had windows all around the perimeter, as well as two potential entrances. The first being the front door, while the second was a door to this small attached space next to the house, which was made of see-through metal, like the kind which metal fences are made of, but stronger. This space had a metal door with a lock only accessible from the inside, as well as a door which was on the wall this space was attached to inside the space. However, this door only had a deadbolt on and was made of light wood. This is also of importance. So an hour or so in after the incident, we were upstairs in her air-conditioned room, playing games on her computer and talking about whatever it is 11-year-olds talk about, when we heard her dog bark downstairs. It was growling and seemed to bark at random intervals. Keep in mind that her dog was a friendly Labrador who rarely ever growled or barked aggressively. My friend went to get the dog upstairs to her room, and after she returned she informed me that the dog was standing near the front door growling at it, and that it took her quite a bit of effort to get him upstairs as he kept trying to go back there. We were really confused as this was unusual for him to do, and thinking that a stray dog may have caught his attention, we decided to go into the balcony attached to her room that gave us a view onto the front lawn and a part of the street directly in front of the house. Instead of seeing what we assumed would be a stray dog or cat, we looked down to see a person standing very still in her lawn and in front of her front door. In the limited light, we could make out heavy layers of muddy-looking clothing and a head full of hair that looked very matted. The dog was with us in the balcony and was whining to be let outside. We crouched in her balcony, and right as we were about to discuss what we should do, we heard what sounded like the front door rattling, as if someone was trying to open it with the handle. We creeped back downstairs, only to realize that this person had now moved on to the window next to the door and was trying to open that. The realization hit that he was trying to find an entrance into the house by going around the perimeter. Just as we were about to creep back upstairs, my friend grabbed me again and in a hushed tone told me that she'd forgotten to lock the attached space door in her hurry. We both looked at each other and paled as we realized that it would give the intruder easy access into the house, as the inner door had nothing but a deadbolt. At this point we heard the windows rattling behind the house, nearly 3/4 of the way back to the front again. The attached space door was a few meters away from the front door, and we were lucky that he had chosen to go around the other side. She told me to wait by the inner door with the dog while she went outside and bolted the metal door. She then implored me to close the door as soon as she returned, and that if she was caught, to let the dog outside and to close the inner door as discreetly as possible, as to not give myself away. We were both terrified, and since we had no time to argue about it, I stood guard in the inner door, while she went to the outer door, fumbled with the lock, and returned inside practically running as quietly as she could. We closed the inner door, and just then we heard the outer door rattle harshly. Had she not gone there and then, there was a big chance that we would have had no choice but to hide in her house had he found his way in. We found our way back upstairs, and went back onto her balcony to see if he had gone away, as we had stood still near the foot of her stairs for a while listening for any further activity. As we looked down, we saw him once again standing in her front lawn. However, this time we could see his head was tilted back, and it felt like he was looking right at us. However, we knew that it was far too dark for him to be able to spot us, as along with closing all the windows and such, we had proceeded to kill the lights in her room, as well as draw the curtains so as not to let her little bedside lamplight escape the blinds. He then started giggling in the quiet of the night and proceeded to go down on all fours, crawling around the lawn in front of her house while his laughter grew. In retrospect, we should have called the authorities at this point. But being the terrified 11-year-olds we were, we didn't want to get in trouble for not even being able to follow simple instructions. He did this for nearly half an hour, only to stand up once again facing the street, and then climb on top of the kennel in the corner, up onto the top of the wall, and then jump down. We still stood in her balcony waiting to see if he would return, but an hour or so passed where he didn't, and that was the very last we saw of him the entirety of the night, till at around 2 a.m. her parents returned. The next morning they were very confused as to why all the doors and windows were closed on such a pleasant night, and why there was mud on the front doorknob. She said we just wanted to play in the dark inside the house, lying about the actuality of the situation, and to this day I don't think the man has been caught. So, creepy front lawn guy, let's not meet.
Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow, submit, obey.